Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I hope you're well. My name is Alex, and this is Slumber Time Podcast. I'd like to start off by quoting a great show. It is important to draw wisdom from different places. If you take it from only one place, it becomes rigid and stale. Uncle Iroh, Avatar: The Last Airbender. Today, I'd like to look at some acting advice from different areas of the world, the usual methods, as well as Serbian and Japanese methods. The main method for acting that is taught in schools is from Stanislavsky, not to be confused with method acting, which he also created. But anyway, the way my teacher explained it to us was that each line has a unit of action paired with it. They are generally called beats, and one teacher took it further and taught us that each main idea had its own beat, whereas each line that's a part of it would be called bits. So you have the overarching action and the smaller actions inside. That's generally not how the theater community views this, and they consider beats and bits to be interchangeable. This may sound like nonsense, so let me go ahead and start off with an example. You may be familiar with Shakespeare's Richard III and the opening monologue. Richard says, "Now is the winter of our discontent, made glorious summer by this son of York, and all the clouds that lowered upon our house in the deep bosom of the ocean buried. Now are our brows bound with victorious wreaths, our bruised arms hung up for monuments, our stern alarums changed to merry meetings, our dreadful marches to delightful measures. Grim-visaged war hath smoothed his wrinkled front, and now, instead of mounting barbed steeds to fright the souls of fearful adversaries, he capers nimbly in a lady's chamber to the lascivious pleasing of a lute." He continues, but I'll refrain from overcomplicating this as much as I can. To incorporate the unit of action, I recommend these following steps. First, you'll need to understand the language here. What is he saying? Why is he saying it? And so let's just look at the first line for now. He says, "Now is the winter of our discontent," which you can guess winter means end, like the end of the year, so he's saying it's the end of their troubled time. That's pretty straightforward. Second, you're going to have to find the subtext to this. How does he feel about the end of the war? Most people would say that he's actually dejected by this fact. He, being deformed, has had a rough life with how others have treated him, so with the war over, there's no more negativity in other people's lives. They can go back to normal, but he cannot. He's jealous of their happiness since his misery is eternal, at least in his mind. So third, here is when you can start looking for a unit of action. What is he trying to do to others in this speech? In most situations, the character would be talking to another character in order to achieve a goal. In monologues, it can be a little bit different. He's likely trying to do something either to himself, while also expositing important information. What would be considered bad direction would say, be irritated, or feel defeated. This isn't going to do much, and it's going to focus the actor on themselves instead of others. It will create a rift, and the flow from one line to another is going to be lost. Acting is like tennis, as my teacher put it. You have to keep the ball up at all times. There needs to be a back and forth. If you only focus entirely on yourself or lose the energy, the ball falls and the lines fall flat. By incorporating an active verb, you're serving the ball, aka your line, to the other person and thus creating that back and forth. Basically, an easy way to imagine this is to say, he blanks him. If you can't just say that, you should find a different word. If I were to choose an overarching beat for this, I would say the active verb I would choose is reproach. So he reproaches them being the people that he would be saying this speech to if he were to speak his mind. So fourth, now is when you apply that action to each line. You will need a new one for each time the intent changes in the speech. But for now, I will just imagine reproach while speaking. It will change from a standard read, like I did before, to something more acceptable for stage use. I will note, of course, before doing this, that I am not trained in Shakespearean theater, so I will not be able to perform this in iambic pentameter. I'm also not a professional actor, so yeah, let's start. Now is the winter of our discontent, made glorious summer by this son of York, and all the clouds that lowered upon our house in the deep bosom of the ocean buried. Now are our brows bound with victorious wreaths, our bruised arms hung up for monuments, our stern alarums changed to merry meetings, our dreadful marches to delightful measures. Grim-visaged war hath smoothed his wrinkled front, and now, instead of mounting bobbed steeds to fright the souls of fearful adversaries, he capers nimbly in a lady's chamber to the lascivious pleasing of a lute. So, I hope that gives you a decent understanding of what I mean by adding a unit of action to this. Obviously, there is more to acting than just finding an action, but that is the very core of what needs to be done in each and every scene. The second point that I'd like to add is one that I learned while in Japan called ma. I'm going to keep this one pretty short since I'm simplifying the idea down to only one of its possible meanings. To understand it completely, it takes some knowledge about the culture, but ma is basically abstract space. In this case, it's the space between words, but it is also used to represent empty space and some more difficult ideas that we won't get into much. An interesting point is that in Japanese, they have two words to call someone an idiot, one being manuke, the other one being manobi. These words both mean idiot, but they're on completely different sides of the spectrum. Manuke, ma being the space, nuke means drop, so it means to drop the pauses, whereas manobi means to extend the pauses. So, someone who talks non-stop, basically, versus someone who drags out each sentence. Both are going to be very boring to listen to unless you mix it up and have the appropriate amount of ma, so to speak. I found this idea to have the biggest impact on my acting, because I kept getting caught up in trying to get through the lines instead of savoring special parts and changing the meaning with shorter or longer pauses. By doing that, with the different speaking speeds, you've created a pretty interesting speech. Let me give an example from this play called One Green Bottle from Hideki Noda. The scene is of a girl who is high on drugs and explaining about how the world is likely just a simulation. She says, "Any computer, however sophisticated, is vulnerable to crash. Even the human brain can be frightened to death given extreme enough circumstances, semicolon. Forces beyond our perception are, inevitably, constantly at play. Though we are of course powerless to understand them, and while we are unable to comprehend in any meaningful way, we can at least analyze the resources of data that are available to us, even as we are part of the program itself. In the same way that you can ask of a computer how much battery is left, or it might inform you unprompted that it has stumbled upon a critical error, or you might infer from the activity in your own brain that you are in fact going completely mad and are, beyond probability, about to die. It is our belief, based on months of scrutiny and vigorous calculation, that a terminal malfunction of the computer program, which we define as our quote-unquote known open brackets, or perhaps more accurately, largely unknown close brackets, universe is due to take place in the very near future, which is to say, soon, the quote-unquote universe is going to crash." Now, the high speed at the beginning was pretty interesting, I bet. However, I would also bet that I lost you and you likely stopped listening halfway through. Without changing the speed nor duration of the pauses, it became boring. Even though it's supposed to be read at speed, there needs to be different changes in the types of pauses and the tempo as well. Lastly, we have the third point, which is about movement. I've mentioned him before, but Eugenio Barba covers the impact different cultures have had on theater and organizes that into different advice for actors. His book Paper Canoe is generally for the more advanced actor, and I would admit that it has a pretty high barrier to entry. If you'd like to give it a look and try your hand at deciphering the subtext, you can check out the PDF for it below. I will, however, be focusing on the more basic and digestible advice. The key idea in Chapter 3, as well as the overarching focus of the book, is to create a separation between daily and extra-daily movement. He gives quite a comprehensive explanation of what he means, but I'll try to keep it simple for the sake of any listeners. Basically, daily is like everyday movement. You're conserving energy. You're using the minimum amount necessary to complete a task. The extra daily is basically wasting energy, but in a believable way. The easiest example for this is walking. You probably didn't think about how you were walking just before this. You just put one foot in front of the other and got to where you are now. The extra daily movement would have you exhaust yourself in order to move. Imagine a ballet dancer walking on the front of their foot. Monty Python's Ministry of Silly Walks is another good example, or even like a basketball player trying to fake you out. Those movements are interesting partially due to how unusual they are. However, they are all still believable on that stage. Also, to anybody wondering about the basketball player, tell me they aren't performers. That's the whole point of sports. You would never normally jump over somebody's head just to get past them, but I digress. So, Barba looks at three main areas in order to create these extra daily movements. They are edge of balance, opposition, and consistent inconsistency. Edge of balance is pretty easy one to imagine. If you're perfectly balanced, it looks like you're just standing there with no intent to move. I'd like to show a short video that embodies that movement very well. You can find the full version below. By creating an imbalance in the way you walk and stand, it will look like you have the intent to move, and the movement becomes more interesting. As I mentioned about the ballet dancer, they walk on the front of their feet. Even the basketball player is going to be on one part of his or her foot. There's no chance of them being perfectly balanced because they need to be ready to move at any moment. That readiness to move takes us to the second point, which is opposition. Something as simple as creating opposing movements in how you move is a way to create an interesting stage presence. By being ready to move, yet staying still, for example, could be your character trying to hold himself back from attacking the person he's talking to. It's the physical manifestation of what the person is feeling internally. This brings us to the key of Da's style. It's done in many other types of theater, but as my teacher said in explaining it, your blood should be at 100%. And your skin at 1/100%. This is known as reduction. A good way to understand this is to try to find a movement that you can put with a line. Imagine what movement the character would do if they had no restraint. Make that movement as big as possible. Go all out with your choice. You're going to look crazy, and you would never do that for a normal play. But once you're comfortable with the big movements, that's when you reduce it. You take that big movement from 100% to 50% to 25% to finally 1/100%. You take that outward movement and that idea and then internalize it into a smaller move. One of the first things I learned when acting is that the outside will look calm, while the inside will be like a storm. The energy inside is what your character wants to be doing right now, but you internalize it into a, quote, normal movement. Hence the blood and skin analogy. The next step, and an interesting experiment to try, is to find a poem and then put a movement to each line of the poem. Try to keep it to about 8 lines or so. Once you reduce each of those big movements from 100% for each line and change the moves for those lines. So line 1 would then be movement 2, line 2 would then be movement 3, line 3 will be movement 4, and so on. You can see how the movement will change the words and the meaning to what you're saying too. However, don't do it all at once though. You need to be used to the large movements and give yourself time to internalize the energy from them. It's going to take several days if done right. Now, the last idea he has is called consistent inconsistency. I find this one the hardest to understand myself, so I'm going to keep it short in order to not change your horizon of expectations if you do decide to read it. Basically, he says that the stage is a place that allows you to suspend your disbelief, so different movements are more allowable. Your moves will be consistent within the realm of the play, but inconsistent with real life. He specifically recommends omitting any unnecessary movements on stage. We have so many in our daily life, but that's not going to be acceptable on stage. It muddies the intent of both the writer and the character. The character needs to have a reason for each movement as well as each line. Each one needs a precise beginning and a precise ending so that the intent itself is also clear. I find the best word to use is crisp, like we used in my Taekwondo class. You can't just go from one move in the form to the next as quickly as you want, because then you lose the strength of the move. It then becomes sloppy, and if that happens, then someone attacking you can break your defense. That's why so many martial artists spend hours perfecting just a single punch. So, I hope that gives you something to think about and also prepares you for any speeches or performances you might have. By freeing up your voice and movement, you'll be a lot more interesting of a person to listen to and watch. If you have anything you'd like to add or even clarify, please let me know. So just remember, we're here and we're listening.